Commercial Drones FM is brought to you by FLIR Delta. Delta is the definitive source for thermal drone knowledge, best practices, and training. Go to FLIR.com/Delta and get started now. Welcome to CommercialDrones.fm, the podcast that explores the commercial drone industry, the people who power it, and the concepts that drive it. I'm your host, Ian Smith. Hey everybody, welcome to Commercial Drones FM. Ian here, and I'm sitting down in Chicago, Illinois with Travis Mason. He's the VP and Head of Regulation and Certification for UAM at Airbus, a little company that makes airplanes and a lot of other cool stuff. You may have heard of them. Welcome to the show, Travis.
Thanks, Ian.
Well, I am stoked that you're here. It's been too long that I've been trying to get you on the show. So we are here at XPONENTIal, AUVSI's XPONENTIal here in Chicago, and you are actually hosting the whole event. You're kind of bringing on the keynotes on the big stage. So first of all, I think I speak for everybody in the industry. Thank you for doing that and kind of keeping everything on track. First, before we really get into XPONENTIal and what we're here about, I want to learn a little bit more about you, your background. I did learn a couple of interesting things that I didn't know about you this morning whenever they introduced you. So you've had a much more of a musical background than I actually thought. I knew you dabbled on the piano, but you were just playing coy. But maybe, not besides the whole musical stuff, but tell us, how did you get here? How are you at XPONENTIal leading, hosting this event? And what brought here to the unmanned systems industry?
Well, thanks, Ian, man. I'm super proud of what's happened with your podcast, how big it is, how broad it is, how many things and people you're touching. So that's super cool to see that. I'm a watcher and a listener. A listener is probably a better way of putting it.
Well, you will be a watcher soon because we're recording this on video.
Which I hate seeing myself in a recording. But
just
so I grew up in Washington, D.C., didn't have a lot as a kid. We didn't have awesome means. And I have really had two loves, politics and music. And those two things have carried in my life for a while. I was classically trained pianist, vocalist, so I've done lots of interesting things. I was also on the other side of being the technical guy. So I've done light designs, I've done sound stuff, and that's how it is when you go to, really interesting schools. And politics was my other interest. And over time, my interest in politics waned, and I started to fall in love with policy. And I went to school for policy. I went to Syracuse, the Maxwell School, #1 public affairs school in the country, ranked #1. Actually, it's been ranked #1 more than any other school. And really had a great experience there. And I serve on the board now of the Maxwell School. And policy has become a way that I see the world. And it's something that I was seeped and involved in my first years at Google. I worked initially on the policy team, worked on everything from the big antitrust, FTC, investigation to some of their intellectual property fights. And then quickly moved over to Google X and moved on to engineering at Google X and was really the right hand to the gentleman that ran our unmanned aircraft efforts at Google X. And never did I imagine that would lead me to Airbus, which is really one of the leaders in aerospace around the world. And right now I'm working on leading policy globally for the Urban Air Mobility team. So I have a great team of folks that are working on everything from the certification and regulation of our vehicles and the enabling technologies like UTM, where we land. Those are certain things, how those helipads and vertiports will support charging. And also have a part of the team that's looking after public affairs, what I call policy and public affairs, although a lot of these words are really synonymous in some areas and overlap. But this team is really looking at the public acceptance pieces, privacy, and liability, some of the more legal issues. We have a lawyer on the team as well. So it's an amazing opportunity for me to lead people who are different than myself. And to also be led by people who are different than myself. So it's super cool. And again, for a guy who loved banging on the piano and singing and who also loved the fighting in politics, I never really imagined that I would be working on emerging technologies policy and be obsessed with it, and nonetheless leading a team at a major aerospace company in the world.
Fascinating. Yeah, it's a really nice kind of journey that you've had to get here. But it's great. It's one of the things I really like actually about for this episode. I'm not going to call it the drone industry per se. I mean, it's more of like unmanned systems. I mean, we're at AUVSI. That stands for Association of Unmanned Vehicle Systems International. It encompasses all unmanned systems, but one of my favorite things about this industry is that it brings people from so many different backgrounds and different industries. I mean, people that are specialized in this and that, and these systems affect how they work and how eventually we're going to live. Really cool to learn that stuff about you. Now, we are at Exponential. You are emceeing the event. There's like a theme. So today is Tuesday. We've got Wednesday. We've got Thursday, where you're in the morning. You're kind of taking us through everything. The theme of today was the power of progress. The theme of tomorrow is the power of execution, and then the theme of Thursday is going to be the power of what's next. Yeah. So what is this? I mean, what is going on here? I mean, is it this? It looks like we're going down this like kind of track of progress, execution, and then what's next. So you mentioned a few things, kind of briefed us this morning on that, but maybe you can just tell the folks who probably weren't here to experience it, like what's going on here. What is your interest in this, and like kind of how are you kind of leading this show from a host and kind of a keynote speaker way, and what's happening?
Yeah, so it's really broken up into three themes: the keynotes, the power of progress, and so we're taking a step back and looking at all the technologies that we talk about being used today, and how the regulations are changing to enable that. On Wednesday, tomorrow, we'll talk about the power of execution. You know, I'm a big fan of execution because we can talk till we're blue in the face about what needs to happen, but at some point you have to do it. And there are people in our industry that are doing it and leading it and actually creating value for their customers and their organizations. And then the power of what's next. And this is where I think our industry lives in what's next, lives in kind of what's coming down the pike. And we'll have some folks talking about how their efforts have changed the humanitarian space, and obviously look at what safety means for the future of the industry. So again, the keynotes are divided up in those areas, and power is important because I think, and concentrated power is probably super important for this industry. We can be powerful individually, but it really takes some working together. And many of these folks that are presenting talk about that. It really takes concentrated power to really move things and push things forward.
Brian Wynn, the president/CEO, I don't know his exact title. He was a past podcast guest. He was on stage after you brought him on this morning, and he said the number one issue for I'll just call it the drone industry right now, and eventually UAM and how urban air mobility will be affected, but you already touched on it very briefly. He said the number one issue is public acceptance. Do you agree?
Yeah, I agree, and I would go a little further. And this is the way I talk about it with my team, and this is the way we frame it. Public acceptance is hard to win over right now. I mean, tell me what public you want to get to accept what you're trying to. I mean, are you talking about the people in a certain zip code, in a certain country? So how do you even tackle public acceptance? So someone like me who lives with folks who want to talk about what's next, I try to get as concrete as possible. So the way we talk about it with our team is influence acceptance first and then public acceptance. It's about the people that are actually going to be the decision makers in the near term. And if you pop out of the unmanned systems world for a second and you look at emerging technologies broadly, or people who are pursuing the business models like Airbnb and Lyft and Uber, or even Google and Facebook, these folks had problems with influencer acceptance that then blew up into public acceptance. If you look at the issues they're facing in Europe with just approvals and relationships there and approvals of their business models and acceptance of their business models, it was the elites there and some of the regulatory agencies that the problem started. And when you don't deal with a problem like that initially and fast, it festers and it grows. So now you're dealing with not only the influencer acceptance, but now you're dealing with public acceptance in a way that's really hard to solve. And you're seeing, I think everyone can agree, you're seeing these companies fumble. in trying to solve their public acceptance problem, because it's grown a lot bigger than I think they can handle and they can manage. And it's great to have all the IQ. It's great to have all the talent. But when you can't deal with the social and emotional aspects, and when you can't really win people over, especially near term at the early stages of your business, you're going to have a problem down the line. So I agree with Brian, but I would go further and say that a way to tackle this is to really get acceptance from the people who make the decisions. And we know in our space, that's not just the FAA. It's the DOD, it's DHS, it's the security agencies. It may be the members of Congress, it may be their staff, it may be the local city council, it may be the law enforcement agency in that geography. And so there are a lot of folks that are influential in the spaces that we hope to be influential in, and you have to tackle meeting their needs and listening to their concerns. Otherwise, it will turn into a larger problem that will be very difficult for you to scope and be very difficult for you to tackle.
Where do you think we are right now in terms of, like, I guess, obviously you've got insight into what you guys are, the initiatives at Airbus, but maybe just more on like drones and stuff. I mean, you've been in the industry for years now. How far along are we in the influencer acceptance stage? And when you say influencer acceptance, you just defined it actually. So like more of like the it could be local leaders, et cetera. Do you think we're kind of like halfway there? Do you think we haven't even scratched the surface, or it's just kind of up in the air?
Yeah, I mean, this is what happens when the table is not diverse as it needs to be. When the core teams and the folks that are building these technologies don't have people with high emotional and social intelligence, or people whose jobs demand they have high social and emotional intelligence. You may think the public relations or the policy person ought to come after, or I hear this often in the industry, oh, well, this is a technology problem. And when you're building something new, yes, there are technology problems, but most likely it's a technology plus problem, technology plus something else. UTM, getting it up and running and developed, yes, that's a technology problem, but it's also a lot of people work that you have to work through. There are a lot of questions that people have from the ANSP level to the regulator level to even the National Security Agency in that area. So in our space, I think we still underestimate the demand that it's going to take for us to knock over convincing people that this is a worthwhile industry and these are worthwhile technologies to really put on the accelerated path. There's skepticism around the world, and I think, but there's also optimism. There are people who want to take a chance and move ahead. There are some areas in the world where they want to lead. There is a race to the top in some spaces. But at some point, you have to do the work of solving the people problems and challenges you have. And if you wait, if you decide that the PR person or the policy person or the lawyer or whomever is not an engineer should be, if you decide that person should not be involved early, it doesn't matter, it's fine. You're just gonna deal with the problem later. And you're seeing this already. I mean, saw it with Microsoft. You saw it with some of the major technology companies. Another thing you're seeing is that these companies are facing the music a lot sooner in the life cycle of their company. Some VCs are now demanding that you hire a policy person as you get funding from them.
You mean like startups?
Startups
hire a policy person.
Hire a policy person because
scooter company.
I mean, scooter companies. Oh, well, we're just making scooters that go in cities. Well, they're actually dealing with serious problems.
Totally.
That it's not a technology problem.
Yeah.
You're dealing with a political problem, and now there's a bill that says you must have inventory in these areas of the city, and that's defining your business model. That's defining where you put your assets, not an algorithm that may be more efficient and obviously may enable your business model to work out better. But when you don't handle these problems sooner, they become bigger problems later. And so I think the drone industry is still the point where they don't understand this. And it's going to take some hard lessons, in my opinion, or it's going to take someone doing it right. And I think there are examples of that in our industry too.
Food for thought, folks.
And now, a quick word from our sponsors.
Genius New York invests millions of dollars in drone and tech startups each year and is looking for its next $1 million team. The business accelerator located in Syracuse, New York, provides your startup with resources, mentors, and industry-leading connections, plus a chance to compete for $1 million. So if you have a startup focused on unmanned systems, IoT, automation, or data analytics, don't miss this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Apply today at geniusny.com. What could your startup do with $1 million? Go to geniusny.com and apply today. Step into the growing season with this very special treat from MicaSense. For this month only, that's July 2019, buy a MicaSense Altum sensor and get a 6-month Agisoft Metashape license included for free, and enjoy high-quality thermal and multispectral imagery with advanced analytics. So the Altum sensor integrates a radiometric thermal camera with 5 high-resolution narrowbands, producing advanced thermal, multispectral, and high-resolution imagery in just one flight for advanced analytics in agriculture. So during July, get your MicaSense Altum sensor with a free 6-month license of Agisoft Metashape by using code AGI2019 at micasense.com. Okay, back to the show. So taking kind of a step to the left or to the right, whatever, maybe let's take a step forward. Airbus, what do you guys, so I want to touch on Airbus then. I mean, that's exponential. That's why we're here. This is big. This is the theme of the show here. We're at an interesting stage of the industry. It's had ebbs and flows. Right now, to me, it just kind of feels like a little bit in an ebb. It's not really kind of flowing up right now. So these are like the big topics we need to think about and what we're really trying to do. But taking, that step forward or to the side, let's talk about what you're up to at Airbus and kind of maybe start off with a little bit more general strategy. Like, what are you up to at Airbus? Your title, Head of Regulation, Certification, UAM at Airbus. That obviously that definitely puts you into the urban air mobility aspect. So that's like the eVTOL aircraft, the quote unquote flying cars of the future, where you'll get into a passenger vehicle that's probably unpiloted at some point, and it'll take you one place to the next. It'll land safely, and you'll have saved a lot of time, a lot of carbon emissions, and you've probably got there safer and just overall a lot more efficient. So without me describing it all for you, maybe you can tell us, what are you guys up to there? Like, what's the deal? Why is Airbus looking into this?
Yeah, so I mean, the data says that in a couple decades, the majority of the world's population will be in urban centers. And we know many of us who live in urban centers or big cities, there are traffic problems, there are problems and inefficiencies moving people and things from point A to point B. And of course, we believe that actually solving that traffic problem will be a combination of not just what happens in the air, but new things that happen on the ground and all sorts of efficiencies that will happen in the whole system. So this is, we have we're by no means shy to the reality that to solve that problem is going to take more than just taking advantage of the air. But we see that. We have decades experience in certifying, designing, and manufacturing aircraft. But for the future, as I was mentioning earlier, the problems are more complex. It's an aviation plus problem. And so, yes, we're looking at building vehicles. We have Vahana, that's a self-piloted VTOL that's being developed in the United States. We have City Airbus, another VTOL that's being developed in Europe. And we also have Pop-Up. It's a partnership that we have with Audi. These are all different vehicles demonstrators where we're learning all sorts of lessons about the propulsion systems, about what it looks like to build a self-piloted vehicle, about what it looks like to take advantage of the ground network plus the air network. But as I said, these are new problems. And so in order for that vision of the Jetsons, or as flying cars as people like to call them, in order for that to happen, there are a lot of things that need to also happen, and we know that from commercial aviation. You have to manage the traffic, so we are working on unmanned traffic management. Some people call it UTM. or UASTM or UAMTM. It has different names around the world, but it's a recognition that in order for you to see the throughput, you really have to work on the traffic management problem. It's infrastructure as well. No infrastructure, in my opinion, no UAM. You need places to land. You need places to charge if it's an electric vehicle. And so those questions are important. And then there's the problems that you won't really know about until you get into the market. And we're learning all sorts of things from an effort that we have called VOOM, that is an on-demand service that allows you to book a helicopter in Mexico City and Sao Paulo, Brazil, and probably more places as we scale. And you learn all sorts of things about how consumers like to move, what their expectations are. Sometimes they'll bring in more luggage, and you know this as a pilot, you know, there are weight limitations on vehicles. And so these sorts of problems, if you think about it from an operations perspective, you have 2, 5, 7, 10, 20-minute delays. That affects throughput. Throughput affects the business model. The business model affects the viability of really the business. So really, the rubber meets the road when you get in the market. And so we're exploring what it's going to take to build this industry. We're looking at the entire value chain, the maintenance, how you build these vehicles and how you manage them. Manage building them. So that's what we're up to. And it's unique to a company that's so focused, usually so focused on the aircraft. Now we're focused on things that are, again, plus, aviation plus outside of the aircraft. And it's very cool. I have the honor of working with some incredibly smart people, some folks that have certified big birds before, so they know exactly what they're doing, and I've had to learn a lot there. But I also work with folks who are sensitive to the community aspects, sensitive to the infrastructure aspects, who are looking, our head of infrastructure, looking at digital infrastructure. How does our digital environments in cities need to change? The data exchanges in order to operate these sorts of systems and really have a viable business. Because you can talk forever about urban air mobility, but you know, it has to make money. It has to be a business.
Got to execute.
Yeah, you got to execute.
It's all about that execution. So what about drones then? You mentioned that you guys have maybe some drone initiatives too that you're kind of working on?
Yeah, so we're working on some UAS efforts. One is called Skyways. We're delivering packages in Singapore, trying to figure out what that would look like. So we're learning there. And again, the unmanned traffic team is really seeped into the UAS space. And of course, they're also thinking about the UAM space. But we have a number of projects there. We also have Airbus Aerial, which is a stacked solution set of taking advantage of manned, unmanned, and satellite platforms to deliver data and imagery to clients, and they're doing a great job. So yeah, working on a lot of stuff. And again, no one has the real answer to this, to many of these problems. It's gonna take doing and demoing and demonstrating, and then I hope we're able to get there.
The breadth in which you guys are operating for all of those key pieces is really, I mean, like I'm like tying it in. That's the power of what's next. I mean, you guys are looking at what's next. You're executing and
oh, that's cool.
looking at all the kind of the exponential pieces. So you guys
and we're
have
making
really
progress.
Been, yes,
to tie the third one, we're making progress.
So look, little did you know, you guys were already kind of like aligning to this model. So it makes a lot of sense for the industry. So obviously that affects the bigger Airbus strategy picture, and you know we talked about policy and everything and kind of how you're looking at it. And I know you've told me you're passionate, like just when we've hung out, like separately from this, that you're just passionate about rules, like rules,
rules,
like the rules. Why are they there? What would it be like with no rules and everything? And so UTM, as you're talking, I'm just thinking of the unmanned traffic management. That is such an important piece that's affecting every single part of that if we want to get to this Jetsons future, this autonomous future, there needs to be the system that backs up all the other systems that are going to be operating on it. And so with Airbus UTM, you guys are making some really nice strides there. So shout out to the Airbus UTM team. Looking forward at kind of like what's next, I mean, not necessarily, but like, what are some of the biggest challenges right now? I mean, we talked about public acceptance, but like maybe as an industry, like how can we kind of move forward here? Like, is there anything that like the people listening to this podcast can kind of be thinking about just an internalizing on everything. Like as we're going through this exponential conference and having all these like high level, really interesting, like guiding talks on this and meeting all these interesting folks, like anything that we can do, anything that I can do, like what's the most important thing we should be thinking of?
Maybe this will prime someone to do something. But regulators around the world are not limitless. They're limited in their resources. They're limited in the time that we spend. Maybe some of us, we're a little unlimited in our budgets. We're unlimited in the time we can spend on this. And I think industry has a habit of making the list of to-dos very long and very unclear for regulators. We have a habit of spinning off several standards efforts, competing standards efforts. And some of that is ego. Some of that I can't blame organizations, but they want to be a part of the debate and discussion, and they want to help solve the problems too. But we have to do a better job at locking arms. If acceleration and speed is important to us, we have to do a better job at giving regulators clarity.
To more focus.
Yeah. Otherwise, they're going to be dealing with multiple ways of looking at a problem, and sometimes there are. But sometimes we can do our job as industry, lock arms with each other, sit in a room. I think many of us sit in the room with each other and fight a little bit about what the solution should be. We could do more of that instead of going off in our corners and coming up with a solution and coming back to the regulator with a solution that may not fit the other solution that just got, and that doesn't fit the solution after that. So how can we be, I talked a little bit about the development of the web, and in 1993, Tim Berners-Lee made the decision to basically put a lot of the groundbreaking work behind the World Wide Web into the public domain. And it was for interoperability, it was for common standards and practices, and it was for collaboration. So how can we do more of that as an industry and get away from running into our corners, put the egos down, unless we don't want to move fast. If we're okay with the speed right now, then my suggestion is that we keep moving ahead in the way that we're moving. But if we want to move a little faster, if we want progress to actually happen, if we want regulators to move with a little bit of speed, we have to help them with clarity. Otherwise, we won't get there.
Well, there's your call to action, folks. The last part of the podcast is usually whenever I ask someone, so any last thoughts or anywhere you want to send someone to learn more, but I think that about covers it. We got to have some more focus. So that was Travis Mason, VP and Head of Regulation and Certification UAM at Airbus. Travis, it was an absolute pleasure to have you on. I'm going to need some time to sit and think about the knowledge that you just dropped on us, but before I do that, I'm going to enjoy the next couple of days of Exponential. So thanks so much for being a guest.
Thank you, Ian, man. You're a great guy, man. Thank you.
Appreciate it, man. All right, everybody, we're cutting off the mics. Cheers.